All right. Shalom Aleichem, Zayt Bagrist. Hello and welcome. My name is Fragel. I use they, fair pronouns. I'm one of the administrators of Queer Yiddish Camp. For visual access, I have pale skin, curly brown hair with a side shave. I'm wearing a yellow shirt with tiny toucans on it, and there's a leafy tree in my background. So next we're going to share a slide with the access statement. This event is live captioned. You can click the CC button at the base of your screen and then show subtitles or view full transcript. We also have ASL interpretation. You can switch to speaker view for best results. After the event, the chat and captions will be available, so you'll receive the link to that. If you are speaking, we ask that you give a quick visual description of yourself that helps people locate you on the screen, like I started with. And we ask that you speak clearly, give descriptions of any visuals you're going to share. Like I mentioned, I'm sharing a slide, and say when you're done talking. If you aren't speaking, please stay muted. Your cameras can be on or off for this event, and yeah, if there's going to be a lot of movement on your screen though, we just ask you keep your video off for that. And next slide is an order of the events, just a rundown of the evening festivities. We're currently doing some introductory remarks, and at 10 after, we'll start with the panel discussion that will go for half an hour, followed by a 15-minute Q&A, so be ready with your questions. After that, there's going to be a break, and then we will have the short ritual facilitated by and DVOYRE, and finishing off with the dance party. So first off, congrats to all the participants and teachers of Queer Yiddish Camp for making it through the first week of courses, if that's one of you. It's really exciting. And hello to all our guests tonight who are joining us for this special mid-camp program. Welcome! Queer Yiddish Camp is a transnational community organized, being taught and attended by queers and peers across multiple continents. So feel free to post, if you haven't already, in the chat where you're joining us from today, including the indigenous place names, if you know them. On behalf of the admin team at Queer Yiddish Camp, we want to thank everyone involved in making this camp possible. Thanks to all the faculty and work trade assistants, the facilitators and panelists here tonight, the donors, including Rabbi Stein, who I think might be here tonight, and everyone who's given their time and energy to creating Queer Yiddish Camp. Thanks to all the queer and trans Yiddishists whose activism paved the way for us coming together as this 2-week intensive. And thank you to our captioner, Corbin, and our 2 ASL interpreters, Francine and Carolyn. And of course, thanks to all of you who showed up tonight for supporting Queer Yiddish Camp. Queer Yiddish Camp is made possible through financial contributions entirely from community members like you. We don't have any institutional or government funding, so if at any point you feel moved to give to support the scholarship and accessibility funds, which helps us hire CART and ASL interpreters for QYC courses and these kinds of events, feel free to give a contribution through Venmo, PayPal, or credit card, and the links for that will be in the chat. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce each of our panelists. If I can find where they are on my screen. Oh yes, there we go. HINDE Ina BURSTIN is a stolze, starke Dijkele who lives on the unceded lands of the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, briefly known as Melbourne, Australia. Her Mamaloshen is Yiddish. She comes from Doiris, Bundistin, generations of Bundists who have inspired her with their unwavering commitment to building secular Yiddish culture and community alongside a passionate belief in social justice for all. HINDE grew up in a strong Yiddish-speaking community where Yiddish creativity was nurtured from a young age. Weltliche, or secular Yiddishkeit, is central to her identity and her life's work as a Yiddish teacher, writer, researcher, and translator, and a community worker and social justice activist. She is a proud parent / Yiddish mama of 2 Yiddish-speaking, Yiddish-loving teenagers. Watching them and their secular Yiddish friends gives her hope for the future. So next I'm gonna introduce to you CHANA WEISS. ZZ is focused on the intersections of Yiddish history and language, queer phenomenology, and OTD, off the derech, identity formation in her studies at the University of Toronto and York University. Exiting the Hasidic community during her teenage years, CHANA, quote, returned to Yiddish during her undergraduate degree, completing a number of Yiddish language courses at the University of Ottawa and U of T. Since then, CHANA is always excited to red a bissel Yiddish, speak a little Yiddish, with other learners / lovers and practitioners of the language. In their spare time, CHANA can be found singing their hideout while playing their baritone ukulele, reading and learning about the world, or on very long bike rides. And up next, we have SHLOMO, who, yes, thank you for waving. Love that peripheral vision. SHLOMO grew up speaking Klal Yiddish and went to the Pripachik Yiddish daycare in the Bronx, Lenape. Their father is a professor of Jewish studies and their mother is a professional Yiddish singer. As an adult, they have found Yiddish-speaking community among Hasidim in Montreal, Chojake, and Jerusalem, Al-Quds, at the Yiddish Book Center in Amherst, Massachusetts, and in the Jewish Studies Department at McGill University, where they are currently completing their bachelor's degree. They are co-running a Moishe house with 2 friends in Montreal and hope to make Yiddish culture a central component. SHLOMO's family is inspired by the Jewish renewal movement, and they have explored Jewish denominations across the spectrum. They have known they are gender fluid and non-binary since they were 16 years old, and they're now 26.
Hey, Fredel, can I interrupt you real quick? It looks like where there's an ask for an access moment because there's some conflict between the live captions and the automatic ones.
Yeah, let me know what I need to click to turn those off.
I have not been able to figure that out.
One moment. This is the captioner. We ran into this in a small group. I didn't realize because it was going very quickly. But I have a screenshot as well as instructions.
There's a comment that only the host can do it, not co-hosts.
Can someone verbally tell me what?
Click on disable live transcript.
You have to.
Yeah, if you're the host, you would click on live transcript. And section in the middle that will, if you click in the middle, it will give you a bunch of options. The bottom one should be disable live transcript.
Okay, I just did that.
Thank you so much.
Great. That looks like that's fixed.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks
everyone.
for letting us know.
Yeah, I really appreciate the collective care of creating access in these events. That's why we're all here. So next, I'm going to bring up MEENA-LIFSHE VISWANATH. She grew up in Teaneck, New Jersey, in a Yiddish-speaking modern Orthodox home. Her first word was tia, meaning door, like open the door. Her formal Yiddish education includes attending Pripachik, a Yiddish Sunday school in Manhattan, and the advanced level of the YIVO summer program. Her informal Yiddish education includes growing up as a granddaughter of Dr. Mordechai Schechter and daughter of Gittel Schechter VISWANATH, and being expected to speak Yiddish perfectly. She also helped develop the Yiddish Duolingo course. And I'm going to go off script from the bio for just a second to say that MEENA has been, like, for months now answering so many questions in the Duolingo Yiddish learners Facebook groups, like just being this amazing Yiddish teacher and providing all these resources to Yiddish learners. And it's really inspiring. Like, didn't just help a little bit, but I think you're like really instrumental to the whole Yiddish Duolingo thing that's going on. In her non-Yiddish life, she is a civil engineer specializing in cleanup of contaminated sites and landfill design. She has 2 adorable children, ages 3 and 6, who are both Yiddish speakers. That is really awesome. And now I'm going to introduce to you our moderator for the evening. Sarah Feldman, Dr. Sarah Feldman, is a former Beis Yaakov girl and current queer tango dancer who is passionate about labor activism, education justice, and abolition. They have taught university-level Yiddish for 7 years. She created and shared queer Yiddish pedagogical materials for other teachers to adopt and has instructed her students to do the same. So now I'm going to pass it over to Sarah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thanks, Pregel, for everything you've done to put this together and for the invitation for today. I am zooming in from the ancestral lands of the Massachusetts people and near some other nations as well. And my background is blurred, but it looks like right now you can see maybe I have long, dark hair. My skin is pretty light and my hair is kind of off to one side. I'd like to get started hearing about the different communities in which our panelists grew up and acquired their Yiddish. And so if you could also, as you describe your community, speak about the impact that growing up in a Yiddish community had on your queer identity and your queer experience. And maybe let's go in the order in which you were introduced.
Hey, I'm HINDE BURSTIN, or HINDE BURSTIN in Yiddish. I'm zooming to you from the unceded lands from the Bunwarang people of the Kulin Nation. I have white skin, purple hair, blue-green grey eyes that you can't see because I haven't slept enough during Queer Yiddish Camp. I want to give a shout out to 2 of my wonderful students, Fregel and Solke, who have done such a brilliant job organising Queer Yiddish Camp. And I also want to give a shout out to any of my Landslight joining from Australia as we sit here anxiously awaiting our election day today in a campaign that's been really awful and where, among other things, transphobia has been weaponised. So it's a tough day for us. I grew up in a very strong secular Buddhist Yiddish community where Yiddish was always political and very, very loved. It was a community of Holocaust survivors who really dedicated their lives and every free moment of their lives to building up incredible Yiddish institutions, including a Yiddish day school where children today still from the age of 2 to the age of 12 learn Yiddish every day. And so for me, Yiddish and social justice and politics were always interwoven. And it was a community that believed in Doikite, that there is no particular homeland, that wherever we are, we have the right to live according to our culture, and we have the responsibility to build up our Yiddish community. Thank you. Okay.
Hi there, Shalom Aleichem. Ich heiße CHANA. My name is CHANA. I use she and they pronouns, he or they. I am zooming in from downtown Toronto. which is on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse, is now and has always been home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Hello, my my teacher, Sasha, Yiddish teacher, Sasha. Hi. I am wearing a white shirt, wearing a black romper. In the background is the Yiddish Vorwärts that is no longer in print, but I've made it my permanent background in my home. I grew up in the Hasidish community in Toronto. I attended a school that actually shut down, but I was in that school, and I was taught Yiddish there until Biz Kittig Gimel, grade 3, and pretty much like learned Chumash and Navi and all of that, like translating first into Yiddish in that school. And then after that, I went to Beis Yaakov, where we translated Hebrew, like Chumash, Tanakh into English. So that was a change. And then as Fragel mentioned earlier, I sort of left at 15. And then I returned and, sort of had this reunited, very emotional experience returning in my academic studies, doing Yiddish courses at the University of Toronto and the University of Ottawa. I would say that the Yiddish I grew up with is not the same as the Yiddish I have come to know. And hopefully I'll get to talk a bit more about that. So, shkayach.
Hi, I'm MEENA-LIFSHE VISWANATH. I am zooming in from Rockville, Maryland on Piscataway land. And I grew up, as mentioned earlier, in Teaneck, New Jersey, in a typical modern Orthodox home. I went to Jewish day school, but I also grew up in a parallel Yiddish community. My grandfather was Dr. Mordechai Schechter, who was a very big activist for the use of Yiddish in daily life, in sort of a big tent way. Linke, rechte, left, right, religious, not religious, even Jewish or not Jewish. If you felt that Yiddish had a place in your heart and you wanted to be part of the Yiddish community and make Yiddish part of your daily life, you were welcomed. And that was the community that the language community that I grew up in. So I had kind of a dual life. By day, I went to modern Orthodox Jewish day school. Nobody else in my school spoke Yiddish. Everybody had the typical American experience of having lost it several generations prior, if they were Ashkenazi. One way that, and being different in that way helped shape a worldview where I am happy to be different in lots of various ways. I also am half Indian. My father came into the Yiddish world before he was even Jewish. And so living in this world, Yiddish actually gave me access to so much difference in life. It gave me access to people who weren't religious, which I might not have otherwise had extensive exposure to. It gave me access to people who had different sexualities, which again, I wouldn't have otherwise experienced. And just finding connections with people through language alone, rather than through other identifiers, meant that I met a really broad spectrum of people, which was very formative.
Hi, I'm Shlomo. It's a big honor to be on this panel. I use they, them pronouns, and I have like white skin and long curly brown hair, and I'm wearing a blue little like dress tunic thing. And I'm in Montreal, which is Ganyan-Geaga land. And yeah, so sorry, I hope somebody else can spell that out in the chat because I'm not going to be able to. I'm on my phone, but if someone else can spell out Ganyan-Geaga, that would be really wonderful. Right. So yeah, I grew up in Toronto and in New York, and there it was really like it was me and my parents just speaking Yiddish to each other. Most specifically, my father, Justin Lewis, and also somewhat my mom, Jane ENKIN. They're on the call right now, so hi. And there was like a little bit more like sort of secular Yiddish community at that point in my life, but then we moved to Kingston, Ontario, and then Winnipeg, Manitoba, where there was really no other Yiddish-speaking community of note. Like there's a few people, mostly elderly, but like it felt like it was sort of like an inner family language and like an inner life language. And there was something really beautiful there for me in my growth, where sort of similar to what MEENA-LIFSHE was saying, like having this sort of like sense that the way that I see the world and understand myself can be different from the way that other people do it because of the language also helped me to realize other things about myself and to like express them in a way that doesn't have the same sort of like heavy weight of like an entire rigid society. Because to me, Yiddish sort of escapes and transcends and slides around like the rigidity of the world. And yeah, when I was like 20 years old, seeking more Yiddish speaking community, I ended up davening a whole lot at one of the Hasidic shuls here in Montreal, the Bobov one. And that was a whole other set of cultural experiences, and also involving learning to navigate like hiding my queerness, which is not something I'd really had to do before. And I've since had to like figure out what that was all about. And yeah, I mean, since then I've been still like trying to find good community and often succeeding. I'm excited to be living with another Yiddish speaker soon, and yeah, to have found like the Yiddish Book Center community and Yiddish studies at McGill. That was the question, wasn't it? Okay, thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Wow, I'm really excited to hear all these answers and to hear more about your perspectives and your background. So just where we've been right now about your background, growing up speaking Yiddish, can you describe your experience expressing queer identity in Yiddish? Do you have the words? What kind of struggle have you had in communicating? And maybe what, especially for our learners in the audience right now, what words would you maybe use to describe your identity in Yiddish and how that might have changed over time?
I just want to interject real quickly that there was a request for speakers to remember to speak slowly for the interpreters and captioners.
So sorry, I've lost track for a moment there. I did not have the words to express my identity in Yiddish, which was really challenging because my beloved Bubba did not speak English, and I had a really hard time telling her that I was a lesbian, because even, you know, when I was in a relationship, and I don't think identity is all about relationships, but even then, you know, when I used the word chavate, she was a Bundist, so this was either a comrade or a girlfriend. I looked in the Weinreich dictionary and I didn't exist there. There was no word. Fortunately, my Bubba decided to ask me how many beds, how many bedrooms my partner and I had when we lived together, and then how many beds we had. So she worked out a way to find it out, which was great. I didn't actually know a word for myself until I came to America to do the Zuma program at Columbia University with YIVO. And that was really exciting, not only to have a word for myself, but also to find a community there of other queer Yiddishism, because at that time in my life, I was really split at the root, as Adrian Rich would say. There was my queer or lesbian life, and there was my Yiddish life, and they just didn't meet. They just didn't meet. You know, I'd go to the Yiddish theatre, and it'd be plays about intermarriage and just issues that meant nothing to me. And so it was really wonderful to find a place where my identities could be integrated and work together. And so, yeah, that was my experience coming out many years ago. It's a very different world today, of course. We've worked hard to make it that way. The words I would use to describe myself are lesbianka, daikale, which that's my identity that I really love, queer, and I also love the word oysterlish, which means queer and also remarkable, not out of the normal range, which for me is what queer is about. You know, it's being outside of the mainstream and loving being outside the mainstream. Sadly, in the most recent Yiddish dictionary, Beinfeld has taken the definition queer out of oysterlish, but I'm reclaiming it and hanging on to it. So that's me.
Yeah, I would say it was very important. Like, I remember my first day of Yiddish class at U of T, and Sasha was handing out, you know, the little pamphlets of what we were going to work through that day. And we did identity and pronouns in the first class. And that really just blew me away, because I was just like, whoa, here I am. Here we are, you know? And that was really important at the time. And I think I tried out, throughout my life, I will probably continue to try out different expressions of gender, and it being an ongoing, you know, evolution and relationship. So I definitely read those words, you know, lesbianke, all those other words, and then feeling like there was a translation miscongruence so I felt sort of disconnected. I'm very excited when I see these words like gender queer, gender fluid, and whatever. But I would say the word that at the time that I related to most was fegele, because it came from Yiddish, and you couldn't really translate it into English. But then I think from all of the words, I wrote down two, and then so one of them is frei, which means free. And growing up, it always had a very negative connotation, you know, and then of being free which means that free of halacha, free of rabbinical authority. And then later in my life.
Sorry, there's a request to pause for a sec.
Sure.
I believe the request is just to pause when ASL interpreters are switching. So maybe if one of you can come off mute and let us know, and then let us know when you're good again.
Sounds good. I'll try and speak slower. Yeah.
Sorry, Hannah. Sorry to interrupt. This is the interpreter. No, I don't mind saying we switch every 15 minutes. So there's one just cue. And you can pin us, I think, so we stay on screen. But if not, we'll just say we're switching, we'll pause. You don't need to speak slower. Only when you list things, we just need pauses, because we have to spell each name, formal name. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, the request was that when the pinning, the camera is going on and off, that they're missing a few words. So we can pause in between.
Okay. So I would say today, the words that I would use would be frei and queer I really like that direct translation. And then the third one is I hope to work with this phrase, and I'll share it with you. It's lebedike yasam, and it doesn't really translate well into English. And I think that there's a cultural and historical relevance around this phrase. So lebedike is living, and then yasam is orphan. And it's a concept that I think is a very Yiddishy concept of, you know, being alive, but also grieving the past, and like being lively and engaged, but then also having this sort of orphan identity of who are my elders so like I'll speak for myself of having, like, I consider myself as having been exiled. Like I was like exiled from like the Orthodox community. So lebedike yasam is like a sort of identity that I use to describe my experience, being very connected to Yiddish history, but also being alienated from other aspects of it.
So I wanted to start with my visuals because I missed that earlier. MEENA-LIFSHE, I'm wearing a white shirt that says MEEDELE in purple. I'm wearing a rainbow headscarf and have black curly hair on both sides. So when I was growing up, because my English speaking world was in my modern Orthodox day school and my modern Orthodox community, I actually heard more about gay and lesbians in Yiddish than I did in English, because my first encounter with gay and lesbian people was at Yiddish Bach, at this weekly Yiddish retreat that I've attended every year of my life. And because it was open to all in Yiddish, often attracted people who were outside of the mainstream community. That was where I encountered my first people who were gay and lesbian and possibly transgender as well. I don't quite remember. But the vocabulary at the time, this would have been in the mid-90s, was fairly limited in Yiddish. So mostly I just heard "er is gay" and "sie is a lesbianke." And so those were mostly the terms that I had growing up. And in truth, at that age, I also probably didn't have many more words than that in English either. But as I've grown older, I've kind of grown up in the Facebook generation. I've been really just so blown away by the effort that's gone on, especially from Sasha Bernstein, who took it upon themselves to really put together a list and spread it. And my mother actually, based on my grandfather's work, is one of the main editors of the Comprehensive English Yiddish Dictionary, where a lot of these terms were actually incorporated due to Sasha and others' activism. And I think that growth, both within the queer Yiddish community, but also spreading outside of the queer Yiddish community into the non-queer Yiddishist community, has been really interesting to see. Thank you.
So for me, there are two sort of layers to this question. I'll start by just talking about words, like vocabulary. Definitely when I was growing up, it was a lot more like English language about queerness than Yiddish. But I do talk with my father most of all. We're like mainly communicating in Yiddish. So I talk about myself and my friends. So I use the words like queer, of course, queer, and minflissig a fair bit, which I think is a Sasha coining that I like, meaning gender fluid. And it also just sounds pretty, like minflissig. It's a lovely word. And yeah, I appreciate like the existence of like fagala as a term. I think it's cute. I don't use it about myself that much, but I like it that it's among us. a Hasidic friend once told me that he thought that somebody might be a gimel. I said that like while like whispering a little, which apparently meant like gay. I hadn't heard that before or since, but I thought that was interesting. And again, I hope maybe somebody adopts and reclaims that. So there's that. And then the deeper level for me is like, sometimes it's nice to not have a specific word. Like sometimes I'm able to be more completely honest with myself when I'm not like, oh, that's the term. Like I found myself able to write poetically about my gender and my experiences there in Yiddish in ways that I can't in English, because like I'm drawing on all of the wealth of Jewish everything. Like you can incorporate any Hebrew phrase into Yiddish, and you can incorporate any like, yeah, so there's that. There's this deep connection that I have with the world of our tradition and with the words in my deepest heart that like aren't sort of immediately connected to some specific definition of something. And that's where I can really understand myself fully and say so to other people. So that's something that I'm thankful about as well. And I mean, I'm hoping, because Yiddish is such a beautiful language, we can have both. We have these layers of vocabulary that are like coming from different places. So I think we won't lose this like looseness, and we'll also have specificity when we need it.
Thank you so much. So I think we have about 2 minutes before the Q&A, and I certainly have a lot more questions, but during that time, I wonder if you could answer really quickly, each of you, if there's an aspect of Yiddish culture that affirms or nourishes you as a queer identified person, or a space in the Yiddish community that makes you uncomfortable.
Okay, so first of all, I have to say Queer Yiddish Camp is so wonderful for affirming all our identities. I forgot to say Freilach, but really this joining of Freilach folk is just wonderful. I also love Yiddish literature for all the queer and lesbian writings that have been discovered and that I've discovered really nurtures me, the music. I think there's such a fabulous queer Yiddish culture. I want to be brief, so I'll leave it at that. I want to say with much sadness that I've been in, I mean, I've been out for a long time, so I've lived a long time, so I've experienced a lot of spaces that were uncomfortable, including my community here in the past. Not now, it's very affirming. Shout out to Kadima, where I work, where it's so wonderful to work with other queer Yiddishisten. But I do want to particularly say I had an awful experience at a Yiddish program in Paris, where I read a lesbian poem at our Shabes. It wasn't even too erotic compared to some of what I write, but some of the people, including some of my teachers, didn't speak to me again for the rest of the program. So I think there's a lot of work still to be done in a lot of spaces. And those of us who live in countries or in cities where it's now more socially acceptable or better known about queer life, and maybe take that for granted, but there are still lots of really painful spaces. That's me done.
Thank you for sharing that. Fregel, do we have time before the Q&A to go through some more answers to that question? Let's do it.
Yeah, I have had a lot of like very healing and like holy moments. Just, yeah, reading like literature and songs by women where, yeah, where it is in many ways like a prayer, some of their songs and some of their work, where, you know, they are queering, we're getting a queer view of like Yiddish life. I'm specifically thinking about Ruth Rubin's Mit Anadel Ananadel, and it's just like, it's this song that I felt very connected to because she's basically singing about like running the show in her house and like sewing the clothes, cooking the food, just like doing all of the stuff, and she's singing it in like the tune to like chazanis that you would hear at a shul. And it was this like, it was so, it's like, it's chutzpahdik, you know, like it's very like a woman singing the song, like it just sort of like blew me away. Yeah, and I've been just like very inspired by those types of work. Yeah, and like seeing just how historically queerness is embedded in the culture, that maybe they didn't call it that, but like it's cultural praxis, you know, for the gender subversion, which I'm sure that you guys have spoken about over this week. And yeah, and I would say the obvious like spaces that like it has been very painful as well, like my experience of like getting kicked out, you know, of these institutions for not, like specifically Yiddish institutions, yeah, for not like complying, for being curious, for asking questions. And I have like a lot of like personal trauma like bound up in that. So it's been very important for me to like connect the threads of my life back in Yiddish history, for sure.
I think for me, it's much of what I said before, that growing up as someone who had a parallel underground life as a Yiddish speaker created space for those other parallel lives that I could live and have so many layers of identity within myself, and not all of them necessarily had to be foreground at any particular time. And so this flexibility of identity, depending on where I was, really my growing up Yiddish helped with that, as well as really, as I said before, so much of my exposure to the queer community has been through my connection with the Yiddish world. So that's been my main connection, yeah.
For me, it's really saying Trinas that's like really affirming and queer when I do it. And like, yeah, just to have this sort of immediate, richly emotional access to like the prayers of women in Jewish history and tradition, and like to be able to sort of step in and say that is very just wonderful and special. And yeah, my mother, Jane Enkin, introduced me to this concept already when I was a child, and has been supportive in helping me like discover more about these prayers. And yeah, it's really special. Like, I feel like there's this, like, the genderedness of Jewish history causes problems and also creates opportunities for like playfulness and reclaiming and exploration.
Sorry, that was an awkward interruption. My apologies.
You're
We
so
switched
fine.
interpreters. Want to repeat that last sentence just to, we'll review.
Of course. So the genderedness of Jewish history and tradition causes problems, but also creates opportunities for like reclamation and playfulness and affirmation. And I think in the non-Orthodox world, and even to some extent in the Orthodox world, like the men's traditions have really taken center stage, and the women's ones are being lost, but they're preserved in Yiddish. And so for me to have access to this is a way that I'm now able to engage in a gendered way with Jewish history and tradition in the way that's right for my gender. So for that, I'm very thankful. Yeah, that's enough for me to say.
So I just want to jump back in and say thank you so much, Sarah, for your wonderful questions, and all the panelists for your illuminating responses. We're now going to take some questions from the audience, and you can either post it in the chat with the word question in all caps at the beginning so it doesn't get lost in the chat with the other comments. Just write question in all caps at the beginning. Or you can raise your virtual hand by clicking reactions at the bottom of the Zoom screen and then clicking raise hand. And I think we'll probably take a few questions at a time just so we can yeah, move through them a little quicker.
Maybe while people are thinking about their questions, I don't think they've come in. Oh, no, we have a hand. Yes. Okay. I see Camilla's hand. Camilla Rena?
Hi. Yeah, I'm wondering, none of the speakers talked about this, but do any of you have experiences, they don't have to be your own, of vocabulary around asexuality and aromanticism in Yiddish community?
No, but that's a wonderful question, and I'm going to be thinking about it for a while.
Go. Masha.
I'm really curious, Hannah, you said that the Yiddish that you grew up with is different from the Yiddish that you came back to. Could you talk a little more about that?
Yeah. The first thing that I'll say is, yeah, like the Yiddish that I was raised with was void of anything political. I mean, yeah, like I would say that it was, you know, classroom setting. They weren't talking about like recent, like our history of the past like 100, 200 years. It was more so like a focus on like Torah and translation. Whereas like later on, I've come to learn about like the various like Yiddish movements that have been very political, and that, you know, we're responding to or making fun of, or, you know, providing commentary, satire, whatever, to the political events that were happening in that time. And so I feel like I had an ahistorical Yiddish upbringing where Yiddish was this timeless capsule. Whereas like, as I got older, I gained more context on how the language developed and like the movements that have sprung up from that. Yeah, and just, of course, just like not having any like female Yiddish writers at all growing up, and then later like discovering those people, which is the first thing. Yeah, and I'll let you know if anything else comes, but that's just like the obvious first answer that comes to my mind.
If anybody else wants to answer that, you certainly could if you want to address some of those issues. But meanwhile, we also have another question, really interesting question from the chat. So you are all people who grew up speaking Yiddish. What has it been like for you seeing and experiencing the rise of queer Yiddishist communities, of people who are learners of Yiddish, people who chose to acquire Yiddish? And how do those experiences maybe differ from yours? We also have another question about the linguistic innovations. To what extent are these new words that people have been using likely to begin being used in religious Yiddish-speaking communities? And I think by religious, I'm guessing that the author of that question meant Orthodox and Hasidic communities. And I throw in one more question, and maybe each of you take about 30 seconds to reply to whatever of these speaks to you. This is also a question about the changes in the language. So what are the ideological and generational implications of new words? So the author of this question gives examples: trans space woman versus trans woman as one word, versus gender affirmation surgery versus sex reassignment surgery, and so on. So the way that I think that this is sort of flagging the way that identity changes over generations, queer identities change over generations, and so do new words. So what would your perspective be on that? And I'll maybe suggest that everybody choose what you want to talk about for about 30 seconds out of those questions.
I can go first. I'm not sure what the order is. When I was growing up, again, I grew up in this Yiddishist community that to me felt mostly adult. I had about maybe a dozen peers that I knew and interacted with in Yiddish regularly, who were discussing kind of our generational questions and issues. And when I hit about 18, 19, 20, there was just sudden influx of peers who were learning Yiddish and brought with them a wealth of other lived experiences that were so helpful in enriching both my life experience, but also my language and my Yiddish. So for us who grew up Yiddish, speaking Yiddish, it felt like there was this laser focus on Yiddish continuity. I have to speak Yiddish with my kids, et cetera, et cetera. And having people come in who learned Yiddish as adults or as college students really highlighted other aspects of ways that Yiddish could and should be used in my daily life, which was very, very enlightening.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I'll jump in. I have to say that the growth of queer Yiddishism and queer Yiddish community warms my daikel and neshama like I can't tell you how much. I think it's so, so wonderful. I want to say in terms of intergenerational Yiddish, you know, there's so much emphasis put on biological family and having kids, and I do have kids and I do raise them in Yiddish, but for me, it's, you know, they're friends who are queer, who are learning Yiddish, and the work that I've been able to do with their parents to get them on board with queerness, and also the work with like young queer Yiddish teachers that I mentor, and I think it's great. I think we can't have enough of it. You know, we used to have a slogan, you know, 10% is not enough, recruit, recruit, recruit. That's where I'm coming from. Let's make it huge.
It's really wonderful for me to be hearing your responses here, HINDE and MEENA-LIFSHE. Like, personally, I've sometimes been a little disappointed with like communities only of language learners, because I think there is a different focus than when you grew up speaking a language, and also not quite as much depth of content for a while. And that's fine. That's the experience of everybody when they're learning a language. But I do long for like people who are peers and have the fluency that I do and have the whole lifelong whatever that I have. And I mean, I have some really good friends who have learned Yiddish as adults. My father learned Yiddish as an adult and taught it to me. And that's been good for me. But I mean, I'm hoping to connect to more people who grew up speaking Yiddish too. Like, would love to be in touch. And I mean, it's wonderful now to actually be talking to you, HINDE and MEENA-LIFSHE. We've been in touch a little bit. It's, yeah. So those are my thoughts and feelings, and thanks for hearing them.
The interpreters have switched. Sorry, there was an issue with the other interpreter. We did it quickly. I'm very sorry. Back to me.
Should I repeat anything that I said for the sake of interpretation?
I think we got it, unless someone missed it. If someone missed what Shlomo just said, just text and maybe Shlomo will repeat. But I think I captured it. I don't know if I was seen.
We're all good.
Yeah, I definitely echo a lot, Shlomo, what you're saying, just about like wanting, we should be friends. Let's talk after this. We are friends, but let's be closer friends. But yeah, just sort of looking, like I feel like queer Yiddish, I feel like the queer Yiddish movement is an inevitable response to Orthodox hegemony. I'm sort of like interested in looking at, you know, the reform movement, the conservative movement as, you know, looking at it like as they saw what Orthodox hegemony was becoming, and they, you know, they were responding to it. And it feels as though this queer Yiddish community is also, you know, we are all finding each other because of the ways in which we've been, you know, alienated or exiled, or, you know, or just curiosity. You know, not everyone has that traumatic experience. But yeah, definitely like I think about like Shamshin Rafal Hirsch and Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who my aunt actually like studied underneath Reb Zalman, and to do the renewal movement thing. And, you know, what we see is a lot of, you know, this OTD story. Maybe they're not calling it an OTD story, but we're seeing a lot of folks who have come from that movement and have started other movements. And to me, I see the queer Yiddishist community as needing that push, or like needing I feel like we need to necessarily include and absorb OTD folks who are, you know, carrying that sort of Masorah like into the movement. And so it's been really powerful, like going and meeting like fellow OTDers. And I feel like OTD identity is sort of erased from these spaces sometimes, but because if you're not talking about it, you're not seeing it. But I guess it's been really powerful just, you know, going to queer Talmud camp and speaking to a fellow OTDer in Yiddish, explaining to them my story, and having that, you know, sort of cultural knowing that like I see you, you see me. And also just like really wanting more of it outside of like organized queer Yiddish stuff. So I very much welcome like casual Yiddish stuff. We'll be in touch, Shlomo. Yeah, I know it. Yeah, that's what I have to say.
Thank you so much. It was definitely worth going over our allotted time, and thanks to everyone else for letting us. I certainly have so many more questions for all of you, and really appreciate the thought that you've put into these answers. For all of us learners, and I count myself in that group, it's really precious to have people who are kind of representing queer native Yiddish speakers here today. I think for everyone that might be more special than the four of you realize. I'm thinking a little bit about, and we exchanged some emails about this, about continuity and regeneration, and how maybe there is something queer in the temporality of Yiddishism, in that so many of us are choosing to learn Yiddish later on, who weren't raised in a Yiddish speaking home, and we are finding other ways to have continuity outside of that framework. So just a parting thought, and I could listen to you all for many more hours, but I will turn it back to Fregel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks to the audience for your great questions. once again, a huge thank you to our panelists, HINDE, CHANA, SHLOMO, and MEENA-LIFSHE, and to our moderator, SARA. Please give them a huge round of applause for joining us this evening. So now we are going to take a 5-minute break and come back together to bring in Shabes. Some things you might want to grab during the screen break to participate in the ritual are a candle and matches, or candles, plural, and matches, a grapey beverage like wine or grape juice or whatever you got on hand, and challah, or a carb-like snack. But don't worry if you don't have any of those things. You can use whatever you have on hand, or just bring yourself back in 5 minutes. So I'll see you at 6 minutes after the hour. All right, so we can start coming back from the break. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a moment to stretch. That's great. I am now going to turn it over to HIRSCH and DVOYRE Rosenstein.
Shalom Aleichem all. Hi everyone. It's really lovely to be here at Queer Yiddish Camp. I have not been participating in the camp this week, so thank you all for having me in the space. It seems like it's been really wonderful. We're going to take the next 15 minutes to sort of slow down and mark the transition between this very hectic week and Shabbos. Before I get started, I'm just going to do a quick visual description. I am a pale-skinned white person with dark brown hair tied back behind my head, and I'm wearing a black collared shirt with pink flowers on it. My name is Em, and I am located on the ancestral land of the Massachusetts tribe, also known as contemporary Cambridge. Cool. So even if you aren't able to rest this Shabbos, we hope that the next 15 minutes and our time together will give you a chance to just connect with some others and slow down. DVOYRE and I spend Shabbos together most weeks. And one of the practices we have shared and sort of a place we sometimes start is acknowledging and naming those we are thinking of and bringing into this space. And so now we're going to take a moment, if everyone can just think about a queer, political, or familial ancestor that you'd like to bring into the space tonight. You can type it into the chat. Awesome. So I'm seeing a lot of people put Deborah Tova, Claude Cahoon, Leslie Feinberg, Burl Bela. Awesome. So thanks all for putting these in the chat. You can continue to write there. We are now going to transition into a small group discussion or just chance to meet one or two others. We're sharing a slide now, and you're each going to get 3 minutes total, and you can choose to answer any one of the following questions. So the questions we're going to answer are, what's your connection, if any, to Shabbos? And or what's something you've learned at Queer Yiddish Camp that you'll be thinking about over Shabbos or on Saturday of this week? And you're going to have a full 3 minutes. So when you get the 60-second marker, you don't need to come back to the breakout room. You should stay in the breakout group. And if you don't want to go to a breakout room, you can choose not to accept the invite. And the interpreters will be staying here in the main room.
So if you're using interpretation, please stay in this room and we'll have a conversation with them. Thanks. Does anyone here in the main room want to share, either in the chat or verbally, any thoughts on these questions? Appreciate what you wrote, what people are writing. I'm going to verbalize this for the sake of interpretation. People are benefiting from the interpretation and others can feel free to speak. And Atara wrote, my grandmother, who was while cis, she was non-traditional, and makes me proud to know she was brave enough to be herself. I think that was bringing someone into the space. Any thoughts about Shabbos or what you're bringing into Shabbos from Queer Yiddish Camp? the downside of Zoom. People don't want to jump in a large group. I will share that part of my connection with Shabbos is it's what I remember most about my bubby was spending Shabbos with her until she died when I was 8. And I remember her feeding the birds with breadcrumbs on Shabbos.
Welcome to the new people who are joining us. A couple others are in breakout rooms and we'll be coming back in a minute or two. But for right now, we're sharing our connection, if any, we have with Shabbos or something that we've learned at Queer Yiddish Camp that we'll be thinking about over the Shabbos and on Saturday.
I don't really celebrate Shabbat like in a really formal way, you know, like I don't seesaw work and whatever, but I always light the candles every week. And I always sing. And now that I've had a week of Yiddish camp and have been exposed to a lot more songs, not just in my Yiddish singing class, but also through resources people have shared, I'm so excited to sing so many of them. And one of them has the chorus of Lamir Alef Freilich sein, let's all be gay / happy. So that one might be my personal favorite to master this Shabbat.
That's amazing. Cool. I know we only have about 20 seconds left, but would anyone else like to share?
Yeah, I'll just share that I'm gonna take a screen break tomorrow. And it helps to tell other people because then you commit to doing it.
The interpreters are going to switch.
It is being recorded.
Great, and if we can take this slide down, perfect. Thanks.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I'm gonna pass it over to DVOYRE.
Sorry, I had to find my unmute button. So if we can we're going to put up a slide. Well, first of all, I'm DVOYRE. I'm a pale white skinned person with dark curly brown hair to my shoulders. I'm wearing glasses and I'm sitting on a screened in porch and there's some furniture like little couch behind me. And you may hear the birds that are here, the fagelas and the fagelas. So we're going to share a slide and with thanks to the Boston Worker Circle, where we excerpted some of this from. But this is the time to grab your candles if you have them. And these are my little snail candle holders, Shabbos candle holders. And if anyone knows how to say snail in Yiddish, if you can write in the chat for me. And we can all say this together on mute. Welcome to Zoom, but I'll say it. So radiant is the light of the world. Oh, great. The word is there. Radiant is the light of the world. Radiant is the light of justice. Radiant is the light of Shabbos. And together, Lichtig is die Schein von der Welt. Lichtig is die Schein von Gerechtigkeit. Lichtig is die Schein von Shabbos. And here go the matches. You all might be ahead of me. This is, keep going. On to you,
Great. As DVOYRE finishes that, we're going to move on. If you have wine or another great beverage, we're going to say as we come to the week's end, we are grateful to share the fruit of the vine together. This is at the bottom of the slide. Sum so vok freien mir sich zu nehmen, a gläsele Wein zusammen.
Amen. So when it comes to the challah, bread and roses came to mind. For Em and I are both new in this so-called state of Massachusetts, and we thought about the bread and roses strike in Lowell, and also that Rose Schneiderman, we heard, was actually here at Queer Yiddish Camp, back amongst us from across the world, and that she coined the phrase, and we thought about the song. So Rose is going to read just one verse. It was translated into Yiddish by Aaron Gonchar and Edith Cooper, and we're going to share one more slide that Rose will lead us through.
Hi, I'm Rose Schneiderman. It's so good to be here at Queer Yiddish Camp. If everyone can grab your challah or bread substitute, let's read this together. As we touch our challah, our gluten-free bread, what have you. As we go marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 mill lofts gray, are touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses, for the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses. Wenn wir kommen an marschieren in a schönem hellen Tag, kicken dunkele Millionen, 1000 Shops auf Stock, beputzt werden mit Strahlen, wenn die Sonne rausgesprungen, weil die Menschen hierin singen, Bräut und Rosen, Bräut und Blumen.
Hashanam Dank, Rose. And we saw when was asking people to write ancestors and people we are thinking of tonight in the chat, unsurprisingly, there were many people who wrote Adrian Cooper of blessed memory. Adrian's Sholem Lied, based on a traditional Shabbos song, transformed into an activist call for peace, is especially resonant today as we think about solidarity with Ukraine, with Palestine, and with many other people and places around the world. So when we were thinking about who here doesn't know who Adrian Cooper is, maybe a few people, and don't feel bad about that either, but who could help introduce this amazing queer ancestor? And we thought about Jenny, one of our faculty here. So we're gonna just loop 2 videos in a row. We're gonna show Jenny at Yiddish New York this past year, talking a bit about Adrian Cooper, and then we're gonna go right into her singing Shalom Lid, and Shalom Lid, and then she's singing that with Jeanette Lewicki and with Sharon Bernstein at the conference of the International Association of Yiddish Clubs, and we can all sing along with the Shalom, Shalom, Shalom. Thanks. And thanks to the tech people who are doing all of this, working on Shabbos. Thank you. But we can't hear Jenny.
Zoe, I think you have to stop share and then click the box that says share computer sound.
And I'm just seeing in the chat, I'll go, Sunday, I'll go into the Slack and add the things that were said at this ceremony for everybody to have.
But had it not been for Ms. Cooper, I would not be doing any of this work, because she was, and I guess that's what I wanted to share about, is not just about her effect on me, but the fact that I have worked with so many people and shared her, what I would call integrated, ethical, exciting, and dangerous approach. And so as a much younger person, I come from kind of an experimental background. I grew up in a Yiddish speaking home, but I had no relationship to the, the tradition with a capital T. And, Miss Cooper was just like, yo, wear it like a loose garment. Come with me to shul, do this, do that. And sort of by osmosis, I became like a very informed secular person. And so I would say that practice, that sort of radical, queer, artist-led yeshiva model, I definitely learned from Ms. Cooper, who was an incredible scholar and was very rigorous, but also a bit phlegmatic. You know, she had swagger. And when she sang, like, you just never knew where she would go. And so the exciting situation context, the ethical, like, I would say a serious Torah Jew and someone who thought a lot about accountability and many other things, and just basically very thoughtful individual and not afraid of the discussion and the debate. In fact, cultivating it, contradiction, complex thinking, open, always open to change, welcoming new people in. So that's the exciting, that's the ethical. And the dangerous, it's about not needing to control what happens at the end, that the investment in process is as much part of what you're making as the outcome.
For a bessere Welt, singing for a better world. We've been talking about carrying Yiddish forward and how to keep it alive with all of its conscience, with all of its riches, with all of its humor and its grace and its fierceness and its ethics and its message for the future. So, Gesang von der besseren Welt. Wollte ich gehabt koyech, wollte ich gelaufen in die Gassen, wollte ich geschrieben Shalom, 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 Shalom. If my voice were louder, if my body stronger, I would tear through the streets shouting peace, peace, peace. Wollte ich gehabt koyech, wollte ich gelaufen in die Gassen, wollte ich geschrien Shalom, oi Shalom, Shalom, Shalom.
Shalom, shalom, shalom.
Wow, tough act to follow. Thank you so much, DVOYRE and Rose Schneiderman, for bringing us into Shabes, and yeah, bringing Jenny and Adrian Cooper to us as well. So yesterday was a really fun day on the Jewish calendar, known as Lag BaOmer, which was basically the end of a mourning period. So people celebrate with bonfires and rainbows. It's really friggin' queer. We're gathering tonight around this virtual campfire we call Zoom, and we're gonna have our own Lag BaOmer dance party, queer dance party. I'm really excited to introduce to you all DJ RIPLEY, but first I just want to let you all know about your party options. If you'd like to have a more quiet vibe, there's going to be a breakout room you can go hang out in, but we will continue to have captions here in the main room. And you can listen to the music right here on Zoom. Don't have to worry about the tech, but if you want, you can mute Zoom and listen on Twitch, and the link to that is going to be put in the chat. So if you're a little bit more tech inclined and know how to use Twitch, feel free to do that, but you could also just stay right here. So DJ RIPLEY plays experimental street bass sounds from cities all over the world, especially those where immigrants mix music from their hometowns, big bass and drum machines rooted in jungle, dancehall, hip-hop, noise, and dub. RIPLEY's crash through breakcore into other hybrid sounds, including azanto, cumbia, bhangra, ballet funk, garage, footwork, grime, Jersey club, kuduro, dembo, juke, J-com bounce, and more. I'm just gonna copy some of those dance forms in the chat because I've never heard of a lot of them. I'm really excited for this dance party. As Professor Larissa Kingston Mann of Temple University, she recently published Rude Citizenship, Jamaican Popular Music, Copyright, and the Reverberations of Colonial Power. So it might just take us a minute to get the sound all set up, but it's going to be a really fun party in just a moment. So the dance party is not done, but we are at the top of the hour, so I did just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who made it out to this event tonight and helped make it happen. Remember that you can support Queer Yiddish Camp's ongoing fundraising efforts with the links that I'm going to post in the chat in just a second. Oh, you already did. Thank you so much. And you can follow Queer Yiddish Camp on Facebook and Instagram to find out what we're up to next. This is our official close and goodbye, but DJ RIPLEY is going to play us out for another 10-15 minutes or so with a few more tracks so you can dance your way into the weekend. But again, thank you everyone who helped put on this event, and thank you all for coming.